Hey, my name is Matt Johnson, and I recently made a video sharing my easy S-LOG3 picture profile settings for the Sony a7S III. After I made the video, I started receiving a lot of comments from people asking about Sony's S-Cinetone picture profile, which is a beautiful picture profile that looks great straight out of camera. And a lot of these comments were wondering, what would happen if you combined the S-Cinetone picture profile with the S-LOG3 picture profile? Would this create some sort of magical combination that gives you beautiful straight out of camera footage that is also high dynamic range? Is this everything we ever dreamt of? Today, we're going to look at these two picture profiles. We're going to be focusing on PP8, which by default is the picture profile for S-LOG3, and PP11, which by default is the picture profile for S-Cinetone. And looking at these two picture profiles side by side, you'll see that the main differentiator between the two of them comes down to two settings, namely gamma, which in PP8 says S-LOG3 and PP11 says S-Cinetone, and color mode, which on PP8 says S-Gamma3.Cine, and PP11, which says S-Cinetone. You can think of the gamma as the main effector of the dynamic range of the image, which is how much detail you have in the shadows and how bright your highlights can get before they start to overexpose. The color mode, on the other hand, as the name implies, is what affects the colors of the image, aka saturation levels and skin tones. Color. So, what would be the ideal combination of these two options, this gamma and color mode? As many people have been asking me, can you change one of these options to S-Cinetone and one to S-LOG3 and create the ultimate picture profile? Well, let's try out and see. First, here's how these picture profiles look by default. Here's S-LOG3 with no color correction or grading applied, looking pretty flat and desaturated. And here it is with a color grade, bringing out those skin tones and making everything pop. Next, here's S-Cinetone straight out of camera. By default, as you can see, it is much more saturated and contrasty, but it still feels very straight out of camera. So here it is with a color grade applied that gives it a bit more of a stronger look that brings out the skin tones. Now it's time to experiment. I started by selecting the PP8 picture profile, which by default is set to S-LOG3, and then I changed the gamma to S-Cinetone. As you can see, it didn't really work. Because the gamma is what's going to mostly affect the dynamic range of the image, by setting it to S-Cinetone, I was removing a lot of the dynamic range you usually get from S-LOG3. I was also, unfortunately, keeping the desaturated colors that also come with S-LOG3. So choosing this option was a total fail that resulted in worse dynamic range and desaturated colors. Alternatively, I also tried setting the picture profile to PP11, which is the default for S-Cinetone. And there, I left the gamma set to S-Cinetone, but I changed the color space to S-Gamma3.Cine to mimic what I did in PP8. As you can see, this didn't help either, and looks virtually identical. I didn't really expect it to be different, but I wanted to be thorough in this testing. Next, let's switch things up, and this is where this experiment starts to get really interesting. Going back to PP8 now, I kept the gamma at S-LOG3 to preserve that dynamic range this camera provides, but I also switched the color mode to S-Cinetone, so I could have the colors that I get from S-Cinetone, but the dynamic range of S-LOG3. And as you can see, wait a second, this actually doesn't look any better. This looks just as desaturated and flat as normal S-LOG3. What the heck? Well, hold on a second here, because looking at the shot side by side, you're going to notice that the green of the grass looks a little greener, and my shirt looks a little bluer. And this actually does make a difference, because if I apply the exact same color grade that I used for the stock S-LOG3 picture profile, this suddenly looks way more saturated and colorful. Far too much, actually. To compensate, I had to go into Premiere and reduce the saturation and contrast that I had applied to bring the image back to looking like it should. Likewise, whenever I switched over to PP11 and did the same test again with the gamma set to S-LOG3 but the color mode left at S-Cinetone, the results were very similar. The footage looked flat straight out of camera, but was significantly more contrasty and saturated once I color graded the same way that I do S-LOG3. So, if you find yourself struggling with color grading S-LOG3, especially if your struggle relates to the proper saturation of your colors, well, first I would actually recommend watching my easy S-LOG3 filmmaking settings video and my S-LOG3 color grading videos, which I will link to down below. But aside from that, you could also consider filming in PP8 with your gamma set to S-LOG3 and your color mode set to S-Cinetone. This could give you more saturated colors with a bit less work color grading. Wrapping this all up now, going back to the big question at the beginning, can you combine S-LOG3 and S-Cinetone and make an extremely high dynamic range picture profile that is also properly contrasty and saturated straight out of camera? No. Sorry, you can't do that. That doesn't exist. If you do want a shortcut though, I would highly recommend checking out my video presets called Who is Matt Lutz, which I have specifically designed to take a lot of the guesswork out of shooting in a complicated picture profile like S-LOG3 and help you get great colors in your videos. These presets even work with S-Cinetone if you want to add a little bit of oomph to your footage. I will link to my Who is Matt Lutz down below. Lastly, if you've never filmed with S-Cinetone and you're wanting to learn more about this saturated and contrasty picture profile that gives you good looking footage straight out of camera, I'm working on a video that will share with you my easy S-Cinetone filmmaking settings, which should be out very soon. That's going to take any guesswork out of how to make your S-Cinetone footage look its best. I will link to that video in the corner and down in the video description if you want to check it out. I will also link down below to all my other videos about picture profiles and color grading, including a link to my free Sony a7S III settings preset file, which you can download and install on your camera to immediately have it set up for filmmaking. With that, thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing if you want to see more videos about picture profiles and filmmaking in the future. And also, have a great day.